Attention, armchair quarterbacks and shower thought GMs. It's time for this week's episode of SportsBall with Mike Maharrey and Alan Mosley.
Are you ready for some hard-hitting sports journalism?
I'm always ready for hard-hitting sports journalism.
Well, good. As soon as you can let me know where to find it.
Yes. Please don't go to ESPN.
Good God.
It's not the...
Did you know that if you have great QB play, you'll have a good season?
Well, it's amazing.
Welcome back to SportsBall for episode 71. I am your host, Alan Mosley, joined as always by my co-host and a Tampa Bay sports superfan who's not as embarrassed as usual. It's Mike Maharrey. Mike, I imagine you're happy.
I'm happy enough to wear the hat.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, got a series win. Got that Columbus monkey off the Lightning's back. Although they tried really hard to blow it yesterday. They were up 2-0 in the first period and then ended up down 4-2 before barnstorming back.
Wait, hold on. You told me that you thought that they had lost because they were down 4-2. So Tampa Bay was up 2-0 to start?
Yeah, Tampa Bay was up 2-0 and then Columbus scored four straight. Columbus could be the LP team of the week.
That whole game was like two teams dueling to be the LP team of the week.
Yeah, exactly. There actually was a point that I thought, well, whoever wins this game will not have to be the LP team of the week.
Very good.
You know what else I got this week? This will amuse you. I got a classic sports ball comment on one of my posts. Because anybody that follows me on social media, or at least on Facebook, knows that when it's hockey time, I post hockey posts. And I posted about a rather technical post about how the Lightning missed Stamkos on the power play, and I thought it was stupid that they've taken Hedman, who's their best defenseman, off their top power play, which is weird to me. But I posted about that, and sure enough, here's the comment that I got. Sorry, sports is just a distraction that I don't bother with. You know what I told him?
What?
I told him I was glad that he stopped by to tell me that I was going to quit watching sports now.
This is kind of like your casual, maybe monthly reminder of why we do, not only why we do the show, but why we named the show what we named it. We named it for those people.
Yeah, it's exactly. This is your show.
It's what's always amazing to me about comments like that is that it's not enough that they have a difference of opinion. That they have to, because this was a sports comment. So they had to actually go out of their way to drop a line in the sports comment to let you know that they don't approve of your sports comment.
Right.
Yeah,
He wasted more time digesting the comment and then commenting on the comment than I did making the original comment in the first place. And you know, obviously, I'm not doing enough for the Liberty movement, so I need to quit watching hockey because that'll free up my time to make us more free.
I had one of those this past week. I was advertising, so we just joined Parler. So actually, I just shared this show to Parler. So the show link is on Parler.
I need to check out Parler.
And so I had made a post saying, "Hey, we're checking out Parler. If you're on Parler, drop us a follow, say hello."
Right.
And someone dropped in to say, "Not interested in Parler, thanks." And I'm like, so when I'm not interested in something, I just keep walking. Right. I don't have to tell. I don't walk into a restaurant to say, "I don't want to eat here," and then go next door.
Right. Oh gosh, people.
You got to love all the altists that are our Liberty community, don't you?
Yes, indeed.
So with that said, I'm you know what? I'm gonna let you kick us off because I have it actually on the top of our OBS. It's called, by the way, in case you're wondering.
I can do that. So I have one of those. We haven't done I can do that for a long time. But this one comes from the world of ice hockey. Tuukka Rask, who is the goaltender for the Boston Bruins. And people are seeing the photo of Tuukka Rask. Now, I can't do that, although I might be able to do that, but not in an NHL game. But you know what Tuukka Rask did that I can do?
What's that?
He quit.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Right? I could do that. He was a couple of games deep into the Boston's first playoff series. with the Carolina Hurricanes and decided that he missed his family. And apparently he has a newborn. So I'm not really criticizing him too hard. I mean, you got to do what you got to do as far as family goes. But he did decide he was leaving the bubble. Of course, the NHL players can't see family. They can't leave the bubble. So he decided that it was more important to be home with his family and left the team.
Now, I just want to say really quick before I drop this picture, in all I'm seeing is he's falling on his ass and then he quit. I can do both of those.
Well, he actually caught the puck there as he was falling.
Well, I can't actually do that, but as someone who's never skated before, I'm sure I can fall on my ass.
Yeah, that's pretty easy. But yeah, he's sitting at home watching the rest of the playoffs. I can do that too. In fact, I am. So
this is a weird random question before we check into the live chat. So you play goalie and you've got those huge pads on and you're spending a big chunk of the game kind of in a crouched formation, kind of like a catcher in baseball. And
right.
You've got, and there's just you see all the gear obviously that every player wears, but especially the goalie. Is it easier to stay on your feet as a goalie and not just fall on your ass, or harder?
You mean is harder or easier than any other player?
Than any other. With all the extra weight versus the ginormous skates and everything else.
I think it's hard for me to say because I've been doing it for so long. It's like second nature. It's like walking. But I do remember actually the first time that I ever put on goalie pads, I was about 17 years old. And some friends of mine and I were at the one of my friends was a manager at the ice rink, so we used to like have these pickup hockey games, and somebody said, "Hey, Mike, why don't you play goalie?" And I was like, "Well, okay." So I strapped all that stuff on, and I could barely skate with all that. And my gear, I've weighed it. If you put it all in the bag, my gear weighs about 50 pounds. Wow. So I'm carrying 50 extra pounds of weight. But I mean, like I said, I've been doing it so long, it's second nature. And it's almost easier for me to skate with the pads on than off because that's how I'm used to skating. Yeah. But I think if you just take the random person and stick all that stuff on them, yeah, it's pretty awkward.
Well, I speak for every hockey manager, and I say thank you for.
Well, you're welcome for my service. And now I'm going to quit.
I'm going to talk a little bit about mixed martial arts this week. So this past weekend, we had the UFC heavyweight title match. It was the third part of the trilogy series between Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier. Now, first of all, before we get too deep into it, I want to point out, so yes, there shouldn't be a trilogy series. I have long since been an opponent of the guaranteed rematch followed by guaranteed rematch followed by guaranteed rematch. And I know that there's people out there that'll say, well, what if a fight had a controversial ending? What if it was what if it was a split decision and the judges' scorecards are really wonky? And you really just don't feel fulfilled in who won. The problem with that is that in the first match, Daniel Cormier knocked Stipe Miocic out cold in the first round. That's not a controversial ending. That's a very final ending. And Daniel Cormier won the belt. Now the problem is that Stipe was given a quick rematch. I believe Daniel fought one more time at heavyweight before the rematch actually did happen. But Stipe's next fight was a rematch. And Stipe won the second fight, in which Cormier was by all accounts ahead on the scorecards. But in I think it was the third or fourth round, Stipe ends up getting the finish. Now, there's somewhat more controversy there in that, well, Daniel Cormier's ahead on the cards. If the fight ended right there, Daniel Cormier would win by points. But Stipe is able to get the finish before the bell, and so he wins the belt back. So then we go to the trilogy fight. The problem I have with all that is that what about everyone else in the heavyweight division?
Right.
Every other fighter, and because it's not only is it bad for the fighters who would potentially be next in line for a shot, it's more bad than you think. The first bad is they're not getting their title shot. The second bad is that it forces that fighter into either take another fight because I want to get paid and I want to stay relevant in the sport, or wait. Just sit out and wait for my shot. And different people have different opinions on which one is the right thing to do. If you sit out and wait, then you could potentially go a long time without a fight, which means you're going a long time without getting paid. Look, UFC,
Right.
most UFC fighters are not making the kind of money that like professional basketball, football, baseball, hockey, whatever players are making. They're not making that kind of money. There have been fighters that have been very successful fighters that have even vied for championships that ultimately were still only getting paid $20, $30, $40, $50,000 for a fight and only fighting a couple of times a year. That's when
Right.
and then when you consider the cost of their training regimens, their training camps, their sparring partners, that's no money. They're basically
Sure.
fighting for the love. That's not good. But the other problem is that but if you take a fight and lose. Now, I know you
Right.
say, well, if you take a fight and lose, you didn't deserve to be the champion. But the fact of the matter is that every time you walk into the octagon, there's a chance you can lose. No matter how good one fighter is or better than the other, one lucky punch, one misstep into a submission, you can lose a fight. And if you're on a 3, 4, 5, 6+ fight winning streak, and that put you in title contention, yeah, the temptation is, well, I'll just wait for my shot, because if I take a fight and lose, they'll put me back to the... Even though I was next in line, and I took a fight because they wouldn't give me a shot I earned, and now I'm to the back of the line.
Yeah. It seems to me, and I don't, this is not really my wheelhouse at all, but just kind of man on the streets. Seems to me that if I'm in a title fight, say you and I, we're in the title fight, you beat me. It seems to me I should have to go back to the back of the line and fight my way back up to an opportunity for a rematch. Like, I wouldn't rule out a rematch, but it seems like it shouldn't be automatic, that I should have to go back and kind of earn my place back in line. Does that make sense to you?
So a lot of people would make the argument that even in a highly contested championship bout, and even in a division where you might feel like the top 2 or 3 people are just head and shoulders better than the rest of the division, yes, you should still have to fight at least one title eliminator before you get another shot. It's almost, if anything, it could be good for you because you get a victory back under your belt. And 2, it's
and you get paid.
Well, yeah, you get paid. And 2, maybe it helps you to have an extra fight, an extra training camp to right the... Because you lost, right? That's why you're having to fight another fight, because you didn't win the belt. It gives you a chance to maybe improve, maybe make adjustments, do that sort of thing. So the funny thing is that I'm not... That's a whole subject for another day. The real subject is in this particular trilogy fight, Stipe Miocic ended up retaining the title, so he won the last 2 of the 3 fights between these 2 gentlemen. Daniel Cormier retired. That was his last fight in the UFC. But one could make the argument that it was going to be a close judge's decision until the championship rounds, the 4th and 5th round, where Stipe really was able to pull away in points. It did go to a decision, but Stipe pretty handily won the last 2 rounds. But what changed? What changed between the first couple of rounds and the last couple of rounds? I'll tell you what changed. Stipe Miocic delivered a absolutely brutal eye poke to Daniel Cormier, and you can see DC right there. You can see his left eye in the picture where he's doing the post-fight interview.
Actually, you can't see his left eye.
I know. Well, believe it or not, he's actually they don't know yet whether or not he's going to be having surgery, but he did have a separated cornea in his left eye. It's Now, I want to be fair. Yes, DC has himself been flagged for having delivered some eye pokes in his past, but admittedly nowhere near as brutal as the eye poke he suffered late in the 3rd round in the trilogy fight for the heavyweight title belt. So here's ultimately the thing. If this was a close fight and arguably leaning DC after the first 3 rounds, just like in the second fight where Stipe did get the finish, but he was behind on all the judges' scorecards after 3 rounds, one could make the argument that DC may have been the overall better fighter for more rounds in their total 15 rounds worth of potential fights.
So like in the popular vote.
Yes. In the popular vote, DC would win. And in terms of dramatic finishes, DC got a first-round knockout in the very first fight. You could argue they shouldn't have been fighting again after that. But that eye poke obviously affected the course of the fight. It was, I mean, if he literally potentially permanently damaged his left eye, then yes, I'd imagine he probably couldn't use it very well.
Let me ask you a question. That's not allowed, is it?
So this is not the Wild West of mixed martial arts. Way back in the early days of MMA and other sports leagues, and even in the very beginning of the UFC, things like groin strikes were sometimes allowed. Hair pulling was sometimes allowed. I don't think they ever necessarily allowed eye poking, but it was something that wasn't necessarily enforced. Now, I
Right.
want to show you really quickly a couple of different gloves. The glove on the left is the old glove from Pride. Now, Pride is the defunct mixed martial arts organization. Pride never die. But Pride was a very well loved organization during its time, and it was very successful until the UFC kind of became the premier MMA organization. But the Pride
Right.
glove went further down the knuckles of the fingers. The reason for this is that so it caused your hand to naturally curl. Since your hand naturally curls, you're less likely to eye poke.
Sure.
The UFC glove is on the right, and this is the UFC glove that is still in use to this day, despite having had many fights kind of skewed by unfortunate fouls. And the UFC glove, believe it or not only is it easy for eye pokes, but for people to understand at home, you tend to have, when you're punching, you want your hand closed into a fist. When someone's coming at you and you're trying to deflect, you tend to open your hand. It's just human
Right.
reaction. So, and number
Mhm.
two, believe it or not, the way the UFC glove is designed, where it goes over the inside of the palm, it actually creates resistance when you're trying to make a fist. So,
Yeah, you can kind of
yes,
look. You can kind of see that
yes.
from the
So
photo.
everything about your motor skills and your natural human reaction is to open your hand unless you're
Mm.
intentionally making a fist. That causes more eye pokes. Now don't get me wrong. If anyone could ever undisputedly be accused of and convicted of purposely eye poking, then they should just be run out of the sport. The
Mhm.
overwhelming majority of these instances, no one is saying that anyone was purposely committing an eye poke. But here's the next question. This is kind of hypothetical to throw to you, and you can make analogies to many, many other sports as well. I mean, lots of fouls in basketball weren't intentional. In fact, if anything, if
Right.
they say it was intentional, that now you get the foul shots plus the ball.
Right. It's
Yeah, it's
another
another
level
level.
there.
I
Mhm.
think a lot of pass interference is not intentional. Quite frankly, I think a lot of pass interference wasn't pass interference at all.
Well,
The
yeah.
point
There's
being
that.
is that the overwhelming majority of penalties were probably not intentional penalties, but they're penalties,
Mhm.
and they should be enforced, because if they're not enforced, why even bother having a penalty? How many freebies do you get? The officials in the UFC almost never take points away. Ultimately, that's the only other than disqualifying a fighter outright. The only thing that a UFC official can do is subtract a point. They take that
Right.
fighter's glove, they hold him up in the air, and they say -1 point, and all the judges subtract a point from that guy's card. Now, I understand subtract in combat sports, and especially mixed martial arts, where you typically only fight 3 or for a premier five rounds. A point subtraction almost always means you lost that round. Or
Mhm.
at the worst, you tied that round, but very likely you lost the round if you lose a point. Second thing is that when you're only fighting a few rounds, again, a point subtraction very often means you lost the fight. So I understand the reluctance to want to take points, because if you're an official and you take a point, you've gone a long way in potentially deciding the outcome of the fight. The problem
Mhm.
is that when you don't have a realistic threat of taking points, and this also applies to groin strikes as well, by the way, which are also illegal but happen. And again, I'm not
Mhm.
saying they're not an accident, but how many accidental groin strikes does one fighter have to endure? And how many knuckles deep does a finger have to be inside somebody's skull before you say, okay, we got to take points? Even if it means we're quote unquote deciding the fight.
Yeah. I don't like subjectivity in
Mhm.
officiating. The less subjectivity, the better. In other words, you know, if X is a penalty, then X should always be a penalty, and there shouldn't be any, warnings
Mhm.
or if you want to say, okay, there's a one, there is one warning on this particular penalty. Okay, fine, but it needs to be absolutely objective. And I think in hockey they do a pretty good job of this with high sticking, which is something like you're talking about. It's high stick penalty is very often
Mhm.
unintentional.
Sure.
You can imagine you're going at 30 miles an hour and trying to chase this little disc around ice,
Sure.
and sticks get up, and even hitting a bump on the ice, can pop a stick up in there and hit somebody in the face. It's always a penalty. And, there's no subjectivity. There's no, well, he didn't mean to. It doesn't matter. And the rationale is kind of, you are responsible for your stick. You have to be in control of your stick. So translating that over to this, you're responsible for your fingers. Yeah. And I just think that kind of subjectivity, it needs to be very black and white, because look, we all know that officiating is a shit show to begin with.
No.
So yeah. So, the more you can do to make it less subjective and more objective, I think the better off the sport's going to be.
I agree. It's hard to come out and say every single time there's even a minor infraction they should take points, because that could very well end up being an instance where both fighters lose multiple points and the scorecards
right.
become
it's
negative.
The
scorecards become almost unrecognizable, because you're used to 10-9 rounds and occasionally 10-8 rounds. If a round ended up being 7-6, you would say, what sport are we watching? I have no idea.
Right.
With that said, I don't know. I feel like I guess at the end of the day, I feel like that there has to be some middle ground. I'm just spitballing. Maybe you do something where, first of all, they do have replay, by the way. They do have replay that they can access. They just practically never use it, like some other sports I know. Maybe you could have some middle ground where if it's an eye brush, like if someone puts their hand out and the hand brushes the face, then that would be a one-time warning, second-time point. But if it's a poke, like actual knuckle, like digit into eye socket, that's immediate point. And of course, ultimately, why do you bother changing the officiating at all? The idea is that you don't have fights ruined. You don't want fights ruined because of the officiating. You don't want the fights ruined because of the injuries. You're picking one over the other, I guess, in some sense. But the second thing is that the harder the penalties, the more likely the fighters will try really hard to not poke people in the damn eye.
Exactly.
People who are going for kicks, leg kicks will start to become very low, like calf kicks, and body kicks will start to be aimed very high, like on the upper ribs, or just flat out going for the head. I understand that'll be a change for technique for some people. But the fact of the matter is that I don't want to see people's eyeballs dislodged. And my last point on that, before we move on to the puck to the head, I'm cautiously optimistic that this event will spurn some potential changes, either to the gloves or to the officiating or just to the way the UFC administers these types of things. The problem is that we always have to wait until some premier fighter in some huge championship fight suffers a catastrophic injury before change happens. They couldn't make any changes when 20 journeymans lost their eyesight. They only do it when one famous guy does, and that's a shame.
Right. Yes, it is.
So with that said, I'm going to play a clip for everybody, and I'm going to let you take it over. But I just want to warn everyone, viewer discretion is advised. What you're about to see is just unspeakable.
He's up in the pen right now. This is in the air to right field. Back it goes. Nando has done it again. Fernando Tatis Jr., a grand slam. And the Padres go on top 14-3. 2 home runs, 7 RBIs for Fernando Tatis Jr. Unbelievable. Tatis has just hit a grand slam, his second home run of the night.
What an absolute barbarous display of unprofessionalism.
I know. Can you believe that? I think he decapitated one of those cardboard cutouts.
Well, at least that person gets a free ball, right?
Well, there you go. So Tatis, he gets a puck to the head. Now, people that are watching this that haven't heard the big brouhaha probably wondering, well, why would you get a puck to the head for hitting a grand slam home run? That's your job, right? It is, and he did it very well. But the problem is that they were up, 10-3 at the time? And apparently there are unwritten rules about hitting grand slam home runs when you're winning. And so here is why Tatis gets my puck to the head for today. He apologized for doing his job. That gets a puck to the head every single time. In the immortal words of Gibbs on NCIS, never apologize. It's a sign of weakness.
Very true. We live in such an interesting time where we're having to teach kids the wrong lesson. You used to teach kids you should apologize. Now we're having to teach kids never apologize. But the sad reason is that in modern society, it's always best to never apologize and dig your feet in, because no one else is arguing in good faith. Your apology won't ever be accepted no matter what you do. There's no amount of
That's
repentance that you can
right.
possibly. If someone doesn't like you, then they don't care about your apology. Not really.
Right. And you certainly shouldn't apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. And I just have never been a believer in this whole notion of, oh, we're winning by too much. The game is not over. They're still throwing balls and strikes. His job is to hit the baseball. Sure. If the Texas Rangers don't want a grand slam hit on them when they're losing, then they should not throw a pitch that he can hit out of the ballpark. I mean, it's not. This is a competitive sport. And, maybe you can make this argument if it's Little League. I wouldn't even make it in a Little League, to be honest, because I'm just that hardcore. But for God's sake, these are professional athletes. They're getting paid millions of dollars to throw balls and hit them out of the park. When I heard that he had apologized, I about had an aneurysm and ruptured a blood vessel because I just think it's absurd.
We need to do something to rein in the San Diego Padres, said no one ever.
Exactly.
With that said, it's time for the LP Team of the Week.
Woohoo!
The LP Team of the Week is the Philadelphia 76ers. Philadelphia 76ers, Mike, I got to tell you, they ended the regular season, well, the irregular season, I guess, this year, with a 38-point trouncing of the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets themselves, a solid team this year. Yeah. The Philadelphia 76ers, I wouldn't exactly say are a super team, but definitely have a lot of talent, and we're believed we're going to make waves going into the postseason. Unfortunately, they already find themselves in an 0-2 hole in the first round playoff series against the Boston Celtics, where they have lost those two games by a combined 35 points.
Ooh.
I'm going to add the bonus. The LP Sports Organization of the Week is ESPN, who hypothetically asked this morning, are the 76ers in trouble? The answer is yes. Yes, they are. If you're down 0-2 and getting blown out by the Celtics, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But it's time to get our solemn faces on.
No.
I won't expect you to take off your hat. Oh, you did. Okay.
It's a very solemn moment.
As evidenced right there.
Yes.
It's time for In Memoriam, where we remember a player, a team, a coach, whoever, whose sporting life was cut tragically short. Mike, who are you remembering this week?
Well, I am remembering Dallas Cowboys defensive lineman Gerald McCoy, former Tampa Bay Buccaneers lineman Gerald McCoy, also former Carolina Panther defensive lineman Gerald McCoy. Gerald McCoy broke himself in the very first padded practice for the Dallas Cowboys. There, you saw it right there. He has a ruptured quadricep, which is just a great big ouch. And to add literal insult to injury, the Dallas Cowboys released him after he did this injury. In fact, it's interesting. He's had problems with this quad before, and there was actually a clause in his contract specifically addressing this injury. But all is not lost for McCoy. He'll still get to keep the $3 million signing bonus when he signed his 3-year, $18.3 million contract. But, Gerald's not a young man anymore, so this could be season or a career-ending injury.
I would let Gerald McCoy truck me once in his rehab for $3 million. Just saying. I am remembering the Canadian Football League. The CFL hasn't exactly gone the way of the XFL just yet, although there may be signs of life for the XFL as well. The Canadian Football League will not be playing football this season. They have announced that they tentatively plan to return for the 2021 season, but will not be playing in the 2020 season due to financial hardships. Again, picking on ESPN, they like to claim that this is due to significant financial losses as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, to explain that, the Canadian Football League, believe it or not, actually makes a big chunk of their revenue from in person, in the stands, live games. They don't have the multi-bajillion-dollar TV deals that an NFL has, for instance.
Sure.
So they can't afford to put on a season and not have people in the stands enjoying the games. So by that logic, it's not really the pandemic that's caused the Canadian Football League to go on a hopefully not permanent hiatus. It's the response from the Canadian government to the pandemic that has caused the CFL to go on a hopefully not permanent hiatus.
100%.
Absolutely. Do you have a final thought?
I do have a final thought. We have NFL training camps are going on right now. We just started this week with practices in full pads, so full 11 on 11. And that means that Tom Brady has made his debut as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback. You know what he did on his very first pass as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer in full pads, 11 on 11?
Interception.
Threw a touchdown.
Oh, okay.
Touchdown to Scotty Miller. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, led by Tom Brady, the Super Bowl run has begun. And Scotty Miller, he's the next Edelman. Mark it down here.
I have marked it down, but I've put an asterisk next to that. The headline that we'll all be reading after week 1 is "What's wrong with the Bucs secondary?"
Well, and here's the caveat to that. Apparently, Marpet missed a block in real, if they were allowed to tackle the quarterback, Brady probably would have been on his butt, not throwing a touchdown pass. So there's that little issue too. But
I'll tell you what.
Casting that aside, touchdown pass. We're going with that.
My final thought is it looks like Dez Bryant, the forlorn ex-wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys, is going to be suiting up for the Baltimore Ravens, catching passes from Lamar Jackson. Now, that may sound a little bit exciting for Ravens fans and a little bit upsetting for Cowboys fans, but I have to say this. I expect him to make absolutely no waves re-entering the NFL, and I'll tell you exactly why. At the end of the day, there's a reason why Dez Bryant didn't get a new megabucks contract for the Cowboys. That he was in decline. Wide receiver is a tricky position. Wide receiver, you can be a little bit older wide receiver than a running back, but they're very similar skill positions in that. And to be fair, Dez Bryant is not interested in being the third slot guy. He wants to be wide receiver 1. He wants to be the guy. He wants to be the reason why the opposing defense is dropping into cover 2 because, oh no, we can't let Dez Bryant get over the top of us. Fact of the matter is Dez Bryant was not putting up those kind of numbers towards the end of his Cowboys tenure, and he lost a step. And in the wide receiver world, losing a step means you're one step out of the league if you've lost a step as a wide, especially wide receiver 1. So I don't expect to hear a lot from that. However, with all of this exciting football news, we got to let everybody know that we're less than a month away from the return of football. And so our football previews are coming up in the coming weeks. So stay tuned.
That's excellent.
It is excellent. I actually said to our mutual friend Jeff Deist, who was talking about football being a potential vehicle for the counterculture revolution this year against the Rona meltdown, that people love football. And if football comes back and it's a success, that's going to make people think it's time to get back to normal. And I agree.
Yeah. Here's what's weird. We're going to have football and NHL playoffs at the same time.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have football and NHL and NBA and MLB all at the same time. Maybe the combination of all those things will make people realize life moves on.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Guys, thank you so much for listening to another episode of SportsBall, and we will see you next week.
Love me.
You have been listening to SportsBall with Mike Maharrey and Alan Mosley. You can follow us on Facebook and leave comments, suggestions. Just go to @SportsBall Podcast. That's @SportsBall Podcast on Facebook. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.